Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for another of the EIC's Meet the Networks webinars. My name is Denise Massey and I'm from the EIC and will be chairing the session today. This series of webinars have been developed in direct response from our innovator community, who have been asking us to have more direct access to subject matter experts from across the industry, so that they can understand more fully where and what innovation is needed. So today's webinar is focused on customers or consumers who find themselves in vulnerable situations, and on those communities who are impacted by the energy systems transition. And this webinar will look at how the industry is adapting to support these people and these communities. So I'm delighted to welcome, we have Rachel Franks, who's from Offgem, Zoe McLeod, who's a director from Sustainability First, and who is abroad, so we're hoping her signal holds out. We have Anna Turrell from National Grid, Electricity Transmission, Steve Dacre from Northern Gas Networks, and Giulia Privitera from UK Power Networks, all of whom will provide the context and insight we're looking for as to why and how the industry are responding to these challenges and using innovation to support them. Each speaker will speak for 5 to 10 minutes, which should leave potentially about 20 minutes at the end for questions and answers. And we are inviting you as part of this community to engage with this discussion through the chat function. And also, just to let you know, we will be recording this session and it will be posted on our website. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Rachel Franks, who is Senior Policy Analyst at Offgem. So can I hand over to you, Rachel?
Absolutely. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Really great to be joining you all today. I'm going to talk about this from a Offgem regulatory perspective. And I'll start with my next slide, please. That was just a cover slide. Brilliant, thanks. I just wanted to start off with sort of Offgem's role as regulator in protecting customers in vulnerable situations and those impacted communities as well. So Offgem's definition of vulnerability is quite broad. We define vulnerability as when consumers' personal circumstances and characteristics combine with aspects of the market to create situations where they're significantly less able than a typical domestic consumer to protect and represent their interests, and or significantly likely to, more likely than a typical domestic consumer to suffer detriment, or that detriment is likely to be substantial. So Offgem's role in sort of protecting customers in vulnerable situations, sort of through the lens of the network companies, is to basically set the regulatory framework to ensure that these network companies sort of deliver a high quality and reliable service to all network users and consumers, and that obviously includes those in vulnerable situations. So Offgem sort of operates a RIIO framework through its sort of price control and our regulation of the network. So network companies operate in regions where they're largely sort of have a monopoly on the network services, and Offgem's role here is to ensure that both existing and future consumers pay a fair price for the cost of running these networks, and also that they get the services that they require. And this is done, as I mentioned, through price control processes, which are reviewed at set intervals. So we're sort of currently kicked off RIIO 2 last year for the transmission and gas sectors, and we're sort of currently in RIIO ED1 for the electricity distribution sector, and RIIO ED2 will start next April. So there's like a little time lag in between the two. But RIIO stands for what's set out there. So it involves setting the revenues using incentives to deliver innovation and outputs that consumers value, sort of highlighting innovation there. And obviously innovation is a key element of this RIIO model for the price controls, and our approach is focused on creating an environment that allows innovation to thrive across the whole system. So Ofgem's use of price control mechanisms to drive network companies to improve their service provision is sort of including those in vulnerable situations. And this is traditionally focused on supporting those who may be vulnerable during a loss of supply, and to help those in or at risk of fuel poverty. However, we sort of recognise the changing landscape of the energy sector, and that networks need to be able to sort of consider and respond to their role in protecting the interests of consumers, consumers in vulnerable circumstances, and ensuring that no one's left behind in the energy system transition to net zero. If I can flick on to the next slide, please. I'm just going to have a quick run through some of the mechanisms that we have in place as part of the price control. So these sort of span across the different sectors. So I'll start with sort of the gas distribution sector. So we're currently in RIIO-2 for that price control. So the GDNs in this sector have a vulnerability and carbon monoxide allowance called the VCMA, and that's a pot of funding that they use within this sort of 5-year price control to fund any activities addressing consumer vulnerability and carbon monoxide safety, and 25% of that should be sort of based on collaborative projects with other GDNs. I guess with the slant on there is that they're open to sort of put forward projects and carry out projects that are innovative and doing the things that they feel are responding to the needs of customers in their network regions. We also have the GD2 Fuel Poor Network Extension Scheme. So this is a scheme to help tackle fuel poverty by supporting off-grid fuel poor households and connecting them to the gas network. And that's also underpinned by reputational incentives. So they report on that to Ofgem and ensure that they're sort of meeting their targets in that area. Sort of underpinning a sort of cross-sector is the Network Innovation Allowance, so the NIA. This was introduced in ED1, and it's a set amount that each network licensee receives as part of their price control allowance for innovation projects. In RIIO-2, so that sort of started last year, this is sort of enabling licensees to take forward projects that have the potential to address consumer vulnerability and or deliver sort of long-term financial and environmental benefits. And there's a particular focus within that in ensuring that nobody's left behind by the energy system transition. And it's expected sort of in ED2 that the NIA framework will be broadly consistent with the other sectors. And we set that out in our methodology decision for RIIO ED2 for the electricity distribution network operators, and we'll be sort of setting out more detail on that in our draft determinations, which will be published this summer. But as part of the NIA, licensees, the network companies use an ENA Smarter Networks portal, and that is an online portal where they're there to sort of develop these partnerships with external stakeholders and enable external parties to bring forward ideas for projects and share learning and project data. It's a really great sort of online platform there to use and sort of for innovators to also generate ideas and get in touch with network companies through that portal. So again, just sort of moving on to the RIIO ED sector, so the electricity distribution networks. We currently have in place a stakeholder engagement and consumer vulnerability incentive, the SECV. This is a financial incentive that drives the network companies to engage with stakeholders and address consumer vulnerability issues. And its sort of key priorities with DNOs at the minute has been to protect customers whose well-being is most at risk during that loss of supply and those at risk of fuel poverty. That sort of incentive will be removed for ED2. I think we considered that stakeholder engagement is very much business as usual for these companies going forward, and that we'll instead be introducing an ED2 vulnerability incentive sort of in these sort of dashed boxes down the bottom of the screen. So we asked that all network company, or all DNOs provided us with a vulnerability strategy, so setting out their plan for delivering for customers in vulnerable situations during the ED2 price control. And that really we asked that they really focus on those vulnerability during loss of supply, fuel poverty, and the risk of customers being left behind by the energy system transition. And this will be underpinned, so that their delivery of that strategy will be underpinned by a vulnerability incentive, and we'll be introducing financial incentive around that, with a chance for sort of companies' performance to be rewarded where that sort of goes above and beyond the ambition that we would expect from DNO companies. So it will hold them to account for within period to incentivize them to develop these sort of ambitious and best practice initiatives, and they've done that as part of their sort of price control and business planning process. So they've put forward initiatives that they feel will meet the needs of those their network regions. So I'll sort of pause there, and I'll run through sort of some of the price control mechanisms we have in place and how they sort of have room in there for innovation, and that we are sort of really driving innovation through this, and feel that there is really scope for innovators to sort of engage with network companies on these different programs that are in place within the price control. So I'll pause there, and maybe we'll go into Zoe next on her next step. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Rachel. And as ever with our industry, if you're not used to it, we have lots of acronyms, so it was great that you explained a lot of those, Rachel, so thank you. So handing over to Zoe.
Hi, afternoon everyone. As mentioned, I'm Zoe McLeod. I'm the Director of Policy at Sustainability First. For those that don't know us, Sustainability First is a think tank and charity, and we're focused on practical solutions for the energy, water and communication sectors with the aim of improving environmental, economic and social well-being. So I've been asked to do a bit of scene setting today in terms of the scale of the challenge on consumer vulnerability and also then the kind of scale of the opportunity from an innovation point of view. Innovation has tended to focus on 4 key challenges, and I think these will continue to remain relevant in the future. The first is identifying those that most need support, so we can target help at those that need it most. And the people that need it most often don't apply for it. Either they don't know the help is there, or there's still some stigma attached to seeking help as well. And the water regulator Ofwat's recent research during the pandemic found, for example, that 71% of people weren't aware of that utilities offered any help during the pandemic. A second area that innovation is focused on is how can we improve access to energy so that everyone can have a warm, powered, healthy home. And Rachel's talked about the importance of the move to a low carbon energy system and increasing digitalisation, and we need to make sure that nobody's left behind. People face barriers to accessing services for a range of reasons. They don't have the skills, knowledge or confidence, for example. Just for an illustration, around 7.1 million people are described as having very poor literacy skills. And as a result of the impact of the pandemic on education, we'd expect that to rise. And this means understanding information and making choices linked to energy needs can be very hard. Connectivity will become increasingly important, and Ofgem reminds us that there are still 6% of homes without internet access as of March last year, and there are much larger numbers that suffer from what we call data poverty, so they can't afford to actually get the data to access services. Some people, of course, don't have the money to purchase new technologies. They won't be able to afford electric vehicles or heat pumps, which longer term can help them save money on their bills. And a lot of people may not be able to access the benefits of new technologies because of their location, their property type, their meter type, or even their lifestyle. I guess the third area where innovation is focused and where it's needed is on delivering safety and peace of mind. We need to ensure that consumers and communities are safe, but also that they feel safe as well. And there are 3 key consumer touch points. One is during a supply interruption, when customers can be without heat or power, with those who are medically dependent on energy being highest risk, but not the only people that could potentially suffer detriment. During home visits, a growing number of people feel anxious about someone coming to their house, and there's increasing numbers of scams, and street works as well, if they're poorly designed, can be a hazard to people, for example, people who have a poor sight, or if they're located badly in front of, say, doctor's surgeries or hospitals. And the fourth area of where innovation is needed and has been applied is on affordability. How can we help people afford their energy bills? How can we support them when they fall into financial difficulty? And how can we prevent them from falling into difficulty in the first place? Now, innovation in this area is especially important as energy is an essential service. We all need it to stay healthy and well. So the need for innovation on vulnerability is huge, and it's growing. I think people often think of vulnerable customers as a small ring-fenced group, but any of us can be vulnerable. And I just wanted to share a few stats to give a sense of the scale of the challenge and how that challenge will change in the future. We have 13.9 million people with a disability or long-term sickness in the UK. That includes 11 million with hearing loss, 2 million with sight loss, 2.5 million with cancer. These are not small numbers. The value of the purple pound, which is the name given to the financial value of the disability market, is estimated by the BBC to be at least 250 billion to the UK economy alone. And businesses are estimated to be losing 2 billion a month by ignoring the needs of disabled people, according to some sources. Now, we've recently done some research for South East Water and UK Power Networks, and medium to longer term, the overall health forecast is for a substantial increase in the number of customers with physical and mental health and capacity problems over the next 10 years. We've seen short-term negative impacts of the pandemic, and the pandemic has exacerbated existing vulnerabilities, doubled the number of people, for example, with mental health problems. We've seen new kinds of vulnerabilities, people with long COVID, a kind of illness that never existed before, people who've needed to shield, and we still have large numbers of people who feel scared to leave their homes. And there's, of course, a number of millions of people who've had untreated health conditions. The NHS is only now starting to work through a backlog of an estimated 5.3 million people who were unable to access timely medical treatment. Longer term, we're looking at an aging population with the incidences of most diseases likely to increase by around 20% in the next 8 years. There's likely to be an increase in heat-related deaths, as well as concerns about people dying from cold in their homes. There's going to be a rise in the number of unpaid carers and a shortfall of paid carers. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge, there are currently an estimated 1.6 million unpaid carers in UKPN's regions alone. That's London, the South East and the East of England. And we've got increasing numbers of people living alone, which makes them less resilient and more likely to end up reliant on other services such as hospitals, a growing young disabled population, and a growth in single-person households and rental accommodation. So there's a bit of sort of perfect storm on what we call non-financial vulnerability. And then, of course, on fuel poverty or affordability challenges, the pandemic has worsened the situation for many who were already struggling or were at risk of harm pre-pandemic. It's resulted in new people, new kinds of groups struggling to afford their bills for the first time. And Ofwat's research found that around a third of customers said they were struggling to afford their utility bills, as many were furloughed, lost their jobs, had their incomes reduced. We've seen a widening of inequalities between some communities, and it's weakened their overall resilience. And some groups have been disproportionately negatively impacted, such as younger people, unpaid carers, those in the private rented sector, among others. Long term, the affordability picture is very uncertain. The cost of living crisis is potentially heading our way, with some scenarios suggesting that by October, as many as 50% of people could be in fuel poverty. And in all scenarios, even the most positive, it's likely that economic inequality will worsen, with increases in poverty most likely in the working age population. So this economic change, coupled with the increase in non-financial vulnerabilities, risks greater consumer harm from poverty and overall much less consumer and community resilience. I'm kind of conscious I've sort of painted a very bleak picture, but this is also a spectacular opportunity. The need for innovation has never been greater. As Rachel has pointed out, there is the regulatory framework here to support this. There is some funding. There is definitely the will, and there's a requirement to take action.
Wow. Thank you, Zoe. That was great. It's always, about scoping the breadth of the challenge and the future challenge, and it's just increasing. And you're absolutely right. There is an opportunity, and that's what's great. Thank you, Rachel, for your introduction about where the regulator's coming from in supporting the industry and picking up the baton with this challenge. So I'm going to hand over now to Anna Turrell, who's from National Grid Electricity Transmission, to share her perspectives on where the transmission operators fit into this.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. And thank you, Rachel and Zoe, for the intros, and particularly listening there, Zoe, to going through sort of, as you say, the state of play as it is at the moment and the challenges and how those are just going to grow in time. I'm involved in this space, and I'm kind of getting more revved up as you're talking. So good to see where the discussion goes today. So Anna Turrell, hi everyone, good afternoon. Responsible Business Manager for National Grid Electricity Transmission. I'll provide just a little bit of context about my role and where I sit within Grid, and then explain to you how we're sort of collaborating with other networks as well. So as I say, for a bit of context, so National Grid published a Responsible Business Charter back in October of 2020. And in that, we made a number of commitments about how we were going to continue to act as a responsible business and to build our agenda in that space across a number of areas. So everything from sort of environment right through to people, economy, supply chain, governance, and community specifically as well. And one of the key principles that's sort of drawn out in that charter and in all the work that we've done since is the concept that both Rachel and Zoe touched on, what the idea that we want to ensure a fair transition. So we want to ensure that nobody is left behind as we move to sort of a low carbon future. And in sort of looking at individuals and groups in vulnerable situations, it's an area that we've been looking at as a transmission business. We've been looking at over the years, and we've made some progress, and we've certainly, I think, made a difference in certain ways. But actually, about a year or so ago, we got to a place where we felt that there wasn't a kind of a clear role necessarily and a clear strategy for what how we play in that space as transmission owners, because in the way that distribution networks obviously have a direct relationship with the end consumer. We're sort of one step removed. So we started to have more of a look at how we could have a positive impact in that space. So as I say, about a year ago, all of the transmission networks came together. So National Grid, along with SSEN and SPEN as well, for Scotland, came together and sort of said, well, actually, collectively, what is our strategy? How do we want to make a difference in this space? And partly that was sort of in terms of looking at the innovation community, understanding how we could, especially with the sort of the new incentives that were coming through from Ofgem and some of the incentives around innovation, what we could best do to utilise some of that funding. And so together we developed a framework and actually categorised vulnerability as beyond just the sort of the more traditional sense in terms of individuals and groups that are likely to suffer detriment in terms of sort of health, prosperity, and opportunities more than a typical consumer as a result of their specific circumstances, sort of per the definition that Rachel gave at the beginning. But actually those that are likely to suffer detriment as a result of not being able to keep pace with or be part of the transition. And again, that touches on some of the points that Zoe made there, I think, as well, about sort of things like barriers to access and so on. And then also a third group was really about those that are likely to be negatively impacted by sort of new, rare or unforeseen events as a result of climate change and so on than a typical sort of consumer might be. So we're sort of looking to broaden that out really. And then off the back of that, we have started to look at innovation opportunities that tackle sort of each of those different things. And I'm sure we'll get onto it in a bit more detail in the more detailed Q&A. But as I say, we're looking at sort of different opportunities, and one that we're looking at most sort of recently is around things like digital inclusion, which again is to Zoe's point there. So as I say, I'm sure we'll get onto the detail and happy to provide any more detail on anything that others would like. But hopefully that gives you a sense of sort of where we are and the direction that we're heading collaboratively across networks.
Brilliant, thanks, Anna. And it is interesting because it's nice now to start getting the network's perspective. So starting with transmission, then we are moving on to Steve in gas and then Giulia in electricity to talk about, and then get into the conversation in more detail about what specific opportunities, hopefully through the Q&A. There is a question come through from Javier. We will get to it, Javier, I promise, as part of the Q&A. So Steve, can I hand over to you?
Certainly can. Thanks, Denise, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Dacre, Vulnerability Innovations Lead at Northern Gas Networks. It's quite interesting messaging coming through this webinar so far, and from an NGN or a GDM perspective, it's understanding now the emerging issues that are potentially coming through from today's society. What are the influences on that, and how can NGN as an anchor institution serving the communities in which we work, how can we make the best use of network funding opportunities, of partnerships, and really leverage to the best if we can the network innovation allowance that's been mentioned, and indeed the vulnerability and carbon monoxide allowances that Rachel alluded to earlier that we have available. And for us, it's collaboration is key. Certainly, you know, we can serve one community and not, you know, completely miss someone. So for us, it's around leveling up the opportunities that we have, leveling up with the community partners and everyone else that we work with to understand what are today's issues. You know, we've got a good understanding of what's happened throughout GD1 and into, you know, second year of GD2 almost. It's really about how can we serve those communities? What can we do to be able to provide the support that's going to be needed today and the support that's going to be needed tomorrow? And those two things could be very different. As Anna said, you know, there are certainly emerging issues around, you know, the impacts of energy prices, the impacts of, you know, the global issues at the moment. You know, there's a real emerging issue of certainly around mental health, you know, and how can we support customers to work through that. And equally, as already said, and something that we do look at is the unpaid carers, you know, the people who look after their elderly parents, and how is that going to impact society? You know, when, you know, there's many people moving into that now. So it's trying to have that holistic view, I guess, from a GDM perspective, but from a DNO, from a TO perspective, is how can we work best together, including Ofgem, to help improve today's society. You know, our ambition as a GDN is to always leave a customer in a better position than when we found them, and whether that's through a referral network or whether that's being able to provide practical assistance, you know, whether it's a fuel power network extension, any of those things, anything that we can do within our remit, and often out of what we're actually obliged to do as a gas distribution network. It's almost our responsibility to work hand in hand with as many people as we can to ensure that actually communities are resilient to change, that communities are resilient to external forces, and how do we build those communities to be able to live together, to work together, and actually to be harmonious and to be leveled across, so we're not leaving anybody behind through any future energy transitions, so that we've looked at and understand what digital exclusion looks like and the communication methods that need to be undertaken around that. So for us, it's about doing whatever we can, whenever we can, to ensure that customers are safe and well in their own homes, that we level up wherever we can with regarding to the provision that we offer, you know, and we engage at grassroots to really understand, as I've said before, the issues that society, and indeed you and me and everyone else, you know, in the UK are currently facing, and how can we make the world a little better for everyone. And that is using, you know, the funding that we've got available, or whether that's BAU, whether that's, as I said, Network Innovation Allowance, or whether that's the Vulnerability and Carbon Monoxide Allowance. So I guess we'll get more into detail further on, you know, and yeah, thank you for listening so far. I'll go back to you, Denise.
Cheers, Steve. We have come a long way, haven't we? When a gas network's saying we're here to make people's lives better. Do you know what that is? It's a long way. So now handing on to Giulia as our last speaker, and then we will, and thank you for the questions. We will get to them, and please do continue, keep putting questions in the chat. Handing over to you.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Giulia, I'm the Social Sustainability Manager at UK Power Networks. If we move to the next slide, just in case you don't know who UK Power Networks are, we are one of the distribution network operators in the UK. And basically that means that our role is to keep the lights on for the London, East and South East region. We roughly serve a third of the UK population, around 8 million customers, basically. Moving to the next slide, I just wanted to spend literally a couple of minutes to give you a bit of an understanding on what we see our role being, because obviously we are an electricity network operator. So what is the role of an electricity network operator to support people in vulnerable circumstances or our communities in general? So we believe that we have a social duty because ultimately we are part of, we're local people working with our communities. And what their role is, it probably can be summarized in around three key pillars. So if we think about our core role first, which is keeping the lights on, when there is a power interruption, we have a duty to make sure that we are there to support those customers that are in vulnerable circumstances. And Zoe mentioned, for example, those that are depending on electricity for medical reason. So we maintain a register called Priority Services Register together with other utilities to make sure we know who these customers are, what their needs are, and we are there to support them in these special circumstances. The second pillar is around fuel poverty. So we already spoken about fuel poverty, but ultimately we are part of the energy ecosystem. And we don't have an obligation to support on fuel poverty, but we believe it's part of our role to help tackling fuel poverty. And ultimately this is about people that are struggling to pay their energy bills or to keep their home warm during winter because of energy efficiency issues. The third pillar is around what we discussed, making sure that people can participate in the transition to a low carbon energy future. So we have a role to provide inclusive services to ensure no one is left behind in that transition. Just an example, disabled drivers, we are working to make sure we can break down barriers to make sure they can participate in the transition to electric vehicles and they have accessible EV charging infrastructure available on street, just as one of the examples. Moving to the next slide. This is just about some of the things that we have achieved and delivered so far. It's not comprehensive, but just to give you a sense of what has been done so far. So we have registered over 2 million customers on our priority services register. This means that if there is a power cut, if they experience a power cut, 1 in 4 households in our regions receive priority support. We've also provided fuel poverty advice to more than 2 million individuals across our areas in this price control period. And this has then led to help directly 50,000 households here not at risk of fuel poverty through providing a one-to-one personalized support tailored to their specific circumstances to maximize their income, improve their energy efficiency, or better manage their bills. And we've also done a series of innovation projects already addressing vulnerability challenges. Moving to the next slide, as Zoe has explained really well, the vulnerability challenge, if we kind of define it in a broad way, is not just becoming more complex, it's not just increasing in terms of having more people that are experiencing non-financial vulnerability, more people experiencing financial vulnerability like fuel poverty, but is also evolving. Vulnerability is becoming broader in a way. So there are people that have never experienced vulnerability before, but they are becoming disadvantaged in the energy transition. And that means that the challenge is just becoming bigger, more complex, and changing. So in order to do this within kind of this context, so we're really committed to play a bigger role in supporting our communities. So ultimately, in the next price control period, so Rachel explained the different price control periods for gas and electricity. So we are about to enter our ED2 price control period, which will start from April next year. And we have submitted an ED2 vulnerability strategy, as explained by Rachel. And this is probably in a nutshell summarizing what we set out to do. But ultimately, we want to support more people more. And that's whether they are customers with medical needs that require extra tailored help in case of a power cut, or 1 of the million households in fuel poverty across our areas. So they no longer need to choose between heat or eat, and people that are at risk of being left behind in the energy transition. So we have ultimately summarized here quite just a few of the commitments that we made. But basically, what we are planning to do is to significantly increase the impact that we deliver to our communities by 2028, at the end of the next price control period. We aim to register another 1 million households on our priority services register. We will provide that tailored support on fuel poverty I was talking about to you before to 500,000 households across our areas, which is roughly half of the ones that we know are in fuel poverty today, in collaboration with regional partners. And that means basically that we're ramping up significantly the social support program that we deliver today, roughly by 7 times. And we will also provide the information and help to 500,000 vulnerable customers to ensure that they can participate in the energy transition. And that includes things like grants towards the connection of low carbon technologies. And finally, the last bit I want to talk to you about is innovating for all. That's a key pillar for us in the next regulatory period from April moving forward. So it's building on the experience that we got so far in developing innovative solutions to support people in vulnerable circumstances or disadvantaged. But we're making a clear commitment. So we're basically reinvest our network innovation allowance, which is the NIA allowance that Rachel has introduced, making sure that 5 million is focusing specifically on projects that will benefit vulnerable customers. And at least half of that is done in partnership with other utilities. So it's building on what we've done so far, but we want to make sure there is a clear focus on vulnerability. And just the next slide is to give you an example of what innovating on vulnerability means, for example. So what you see here is a project called Social Connect that we have set up in collaboration with the Energy Innovation Center. So we run a call for innovation, call for ideas. And the problem we are trying to address is the fact that there are people that are entering fuel poverty that are sort of invisible. So it's more difficult to identify who they are, but it's actually easier, as I think Zoe mentioned this as well, if we could actually deliver proactive preventative support rather than supporting just reactively those that are in deep fuel poverty. So we have identified a solution in collaboration with Energy System Catapult and Urban Tide that will develop, we're basically designing and developing a solution that using artificial intelligence and machine learning as smart meter metadata will be able to identify more people that are in fuel poverty or even entering, transitioning to fuel poverty on a very granular level, like street by street level. And this is just an example of what innovation can do in this space. So my final slide, if you can move to the last one, is just to say that we're always open for ideas to innovate in this space, traditional vulnerabilities, but as well as new types of vulnerabilities, breaking down the barriers that people will experience in the transition to net zero. So if you have ideas, get in touch with us. You can submit an ideas on our website, or likewise, you can also engage with the EIC and we will work together to develop it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Giulia, and thank you. There's quite a debate going on in the chat, so we'll get to that. Just to say, I didn't actually, for those of you who don't know what the EIC is, the EIUC is it's Energy Innovation Centre. Basically, we are a platform which is free to innovators and anybody external to the industry to submit an idea. So, and the idea is that the barrier to entry of the industry is low. So I know Javier has got, one of the questions was, how do you contact? So Javier, your question was, for me, was around, I want to talk to Rachel about connecting, about flexibility and balancing the system. And what you can do is talk to the EIC. So we've got a team of engineers who really understand the industry, who can work out where your technology fits and who is the customer. So is it the DNO? Is it the SO, sorry, the energy systems operator, or is it the transmission system? And we can help you with that. So by all means, contact. Our team will put a contact on the chat for you to get directly in touch with us. We have got two other questions, one from William Baker and one from Kenny Cameron. But before we go straight to those questions, can we, I want to just really to go back and then say so given all the information we've just heard, Rachel, I suppose two questions really for you. And what does Offgem see as being key in effectively supporting customers in vulnerable situations? And how do you think innovators can get involved in that? And then I think, Zoe, I'll come back to you again on that as well, about your view about how innovators can get involved. And going back to, yes, there are also, Rachel said in her presentation that there's the Smarter Networks portal. So there are a number of ways people can get in touch with the industry. But what we would say is, so the EIC is a baseline gateway into. So by all means, you can start with us and then we can signpost you to the others. So Rachel, can I ask you to come back just on the key points?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Denise. I'll start with your first question, sort of what are the key areas that Ofgem see as being effective and sort of supporting customers in vulnerable situations. So I think, yeah, I'm going to speak, I guess, for ED2 here, but I think it applies across sector as well. But you know, we've set out that these vulnerability strategies should address those three key areas. You know, we see, you know, power cut support or supporting those vulnerable during loss of supply is really fundamental to the role of especially distribution companies, and that's a really core part of it, but also that fuel poverty support and ensuring that nobody's left behind by the energy system transition. But I think underpinning those three sort of key areas of focus is sort of networks companies' ability to identify who's vulnerable in their region. And for ED2, we've set the expectation that you know, for DNOs, that they should sort of maximise the opportunities they have to identify and deliver support to customers through sort of smart uses of data. So we expect DNOs to be using social indicator or vulnerability mapping to inform their sort of approach to service development and approach to partnerships, and sort of identification of those who should be on the priority services register, but also beyond that. And recognizing that vulnerability can be transient and may evolve throughout that transition to net zero. So I think, we expect the DNOs to have a really good understanding of the social and wellbeing issues associated with their role and the prevalence of these within their customer base and within their region. And that's sort of the first question. And then I think your second question was around sort of how can innovators get involved? And I think we really drive the network companies to deliver a high quality service, which is cost efficient and fair, and to reduce the impact on consumer bills as much as possible whilst providing a quality service. And I think network companies should be encouraged to think innovatively and share learnings and best practice to deliver that high level consumer benefit and value that we would expect. And I think things like the NIA, the Network Innovation Allowance that we've talked through, and some of the other funding mechanisms within the Rio framework really allow for that, and allow that innovators to come in with ideas and approach network companies with those and take them forward. And I think overall there's a lot of mechanisms in this space for innovators to collaborate with these network companies and trial approaches which respond to emerging issues and tackle some of these vulnerability challenges that we're seeing.
Thanks, Rachel. Rachel, you touched on a point there, which in fact came up in the chat as well, about measuring beyond innovation, beyond return on investment, which we often got talked about. Now, I know that all the networks, transmission and distribution networks, are working on how to measure that social value. So I just wondered, Anna, if I could ask Anna and Giulia maybe just have a quick overview about what that is, the piece of work that you guys have been doing to try and demonstrate what that value is, through the work through your SVP and SEER partners. Would that be all right, just so people understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly that. So we had been doing some work to certainly internally to National Grid to try and measure social sort of return on investment. So to try and understand what various initiatives were delivering by way of social value in terms of sort of benefit to the community. But we recognised that there were sort of lots of tools already out there, that different networks were using different tools and different approaches. So we sort of recognised a need across the energy industry, certainly, for us to come together and potentially try and come up with a common approach. So that happened recently. Actually, we got representatives from all of the networks, electricity, gas, transmission and distribution, with the view to looking at how we could potentially move ahead with a common approach, sort of building on all the great work that lots of the networks have already done in this space. So it will be that real kind of trying to understand and quantify the value that's being driven through the various initiatives.
Thanks, Anna. And Giulia?
Yeah, if I can just briefly add, I think Anna covered it really well. So the beauty of that is that we got all together to also compare what are the different tools that we are using. And as distribution network operators, so ahead of ED2, we've done a specific piece of work to make sure we align our social return on investment tool. So it's something that as DNOs we have already done as a group. So it builds some solid foundation to build on that, taking the learning from our experience and share it with the transmission networks, but gas networks were also involved. So it was a cross-sector discussion, really, really interesting and really useful to share the experience so far.
And so just really for innovators' perspective, will this be published? Can people access that? Because obviously if they know what you're measuring, they'll know, how you shape an innovation project to hit those targets, if you like, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. So having just had a sort of the inaugural meeting and bringing everyone together, we're sort of working through next steps now, and we'll be kicking off the project sort of with the start of the new financial year. So we'll be able to sort of share more of the details as they evolve. But certainly the intention, I think, is to have a tool that is accessible to everybody, so that, again, that we all use that common approach and there's a common language to it.
Right, thank you. Presumably that then makes it easier for innovators because they innovate right across the sector, that you're all doing the same thing. So that sounds like a good plan. And Zoe, finally coming on to you. You were talking before about all the challenges that are facing us in and around vulnerability in its broader sense. So what do you think the opportunities are? You said it was fabulous. You said there's lots of money. So what do you think the opportunities are?
So if I could just answer the first question before, which was about how innovators can get involved. So Rachel's talked about the regulatory frameworks. I think it's worth, as Anna's sort of alluded to, looking at companies' kind of responsible business strategies and their defined purposes, because that gives you an idea of where they're going to put their energies and efforts. Obviously yourselves are a portal for first point of call for people who've got ideas, but it's also worth not forgetting third sector organisations like Citizens Advice and like ourselves. We've done a lot of work with government and with regulators and with other businesses, and if it's a great idea and we think it's a great idea, we'll be advocates for it if you can make the case for it. So it's also worth considering who can advocate on your behalf. I think, I mean, I've outlined sort of 4 key areas where I think there's real opportunities. One is around affordability, sort of starting to think about how we can help reduce fuel poverty. Obviously, we can't control wholesale prices, but there are innovations that can help people better manage their energy use, better control their energy use, budget more easily, and you know, at the moment, we have zonal heating in homes. I kind of wonder, although I appreciate a lot of fuel poverty charities will hate me saying this, should we really be heating whole homes or whole rooms when we could heat the person? You know, do we need to, if the energy crisis is and the cost of living crisis is going to be as profound as it could be, start to think a bit more innovatively. I think the other one is resilience. We'll have seen already this year, we've had storms, we've had flooding. There is a real need to start thinking about how can we help customers and communities to be more resilient to these climate impacts. And that's not just about working with energy companies, that's about working cross-sectorally, which is, you know, the title of your webinar is about impacted communities. And one of the great things about communities is you can have cross-sectoral approaches. Obviously, if your electricity goes out, it impacts potentially the ability to pump water. So your water might go out as well. Your telecoms are going to go out. So these issues are not experienced on a sector-by-sector basis by customers. So I think there's real opportunities there. And I guess the one thing I'd really urge people to do who are designing products and services is thinking about inclusive design. So that is designing a product so it can be used by kind of the lowest common denominator in terms of kind of abilities. Hopefully I've really hammered home the fact that, you know, there are huge numbers of people with dexterity, mobility problems out there. And if you're not designing something that meets their needs, you're not designing something that's meeting the needs of a, you know, a large proportion of the population, and you're frankly missing out on an opportunity.
Thanks, Zoe. Zoe, linked to that, we had a question from Stephen Spicely. Now I'm going to read it out but it's to the heart of what you're saying about cross-sector, cross-collaboration. It says, where do you see the biggest barriers for improving cross-industry collaboration and indeed collaboration with support networks such as charities and social services? It is being able to efficiently pull together data across stakeholders. Forgive me reading this, is it efficiently being able to collaborate and share data, or is it something else? So I guess Giulia and Steve, it'd be really interesting to see how, because we've talked about this, haven't we, about the overlap with things like social services and work with charities. So could you share your thoughts on what you see, what are the barriers and how we improve that working with beyond sector?
Yeah, I think it is more complex.
Zoe, forgive me, sorry, I didn't make it clear. I was going to ask Giulia and Steve from the networks, if that's okay. Okay.
Do you want to go first, Giulia? Yeah. So for me, I mean, we already do a lot of work in this area as a GDN, working with Citizens Advice, looking at projects with the NSPCC, yeah, and real community grassroots projects, and we're looking at that on a local regional level, but we're also looking at that on a wider GDN collaborative perspective as well. So and using appropriate funding mechanisms for that. But it's about, I guess, from a GDN perspective and an emergency response perspective, is our engineers are uniquely positioned in the fact that they are invited into customers' houses, that they are at first hand experiencing how the customer is, how they live, are the sign, you know, other issues, other signs that potential other services need to be involved in, other child protection issues. It's around training, it's around being able to identify a need, you know, and actually being able to effectively refer on for that, certainly from an engineer perspective, and using making every contact count as an example where we have a number of referral mechanisms for additional support for customers. It's also about really, so we have representatives from CAB join our quarterly customers in vulnerable situations workshops. So we have grassroots representation from local community groups, from charitable partners to key stakeholders. And it's really about, you know, we just had one actually yesterday, our annual workshop, where we talked about, you know, the things that we've done as a business and how can we improve, what are the emerging issues, and being able to really work at grassroots level with communities to really understand what are the needs now. Is it, you know, where are fuel banks appearing, and, you know, fuel banks don't appear without a need in a particular area, you know. So alongside that is using mapping tools, new and innovative ways of using data to visualize and to really map with live source data as to what are the emerging issues that the communities in which we serve, what are those things that they need the most, you know, and then be able to offer, you know, adjust or change our service provision to suit, and whether that's making additional referral networks, whether that's engaging with additional community resources, you know, in particular areas where issues have been identified or service provision has been called for. It's really trying to offer that holistic approach to really solve some of the societal issues that are faced by customers in vulnerable situations, and by customers more broadly who now, with everything else that's going on, are likely to transition, whether it be temporary or, you know, just moving in and out of vulnerability. And how do we address that as a gas distribution network? And we do that through collaboration is always the key.
Brilliant.
Giulia.
Thank you. Giulia, just before, can I also ask you to wrap in the answer to another question, if possible? Another question that's come through is about, they were talking a lot about vulnerability and data, and this is profiling. So how energy companies get consumer consent to do this? So if you could answer that in this question as well.
Of course.
No,
of course.
Steve, sorry, Steve. I've moved on to Giulia. Forgive me. Sorry about that.
It's okay. So I think, yeah, basically in terms of data profiling customers and consent to use data. So I think it's very important to differentiate between different types of companies. So we're not all the same. So obviously energy suppliers and water companies, they have the direct relationship with their customers. They have basically the bill payer registered the data with them. So it's quite different from us as a distribution network operator and gas, that we actually deliver electricity and gas through the infrastructure. So we don't necessarily have the direct relationship with our customers. If we think about the priority services register, for example, so we get the data, our customers register with us, or they can register with the energy supplier or the water company. And then depending on different agreements that there are across the industry, the data might be shared across different organizations. And that's something I wanted to actually, was building on the previous point. What are the barriers to do cross-sector collaboration? So I think the data sharing is probably one of the key challenges, but there are ways to address it. So the good news is that there are already examples of how we are doing it, and it can work, but there is a level of complexity in terms of aligning different data that different organizations are getting. So we have integrated our PSR with 2 water companies. We are rolling it out with others. So that means that automatically data is shared based on certain circumstances. So going back on how we gather the consent. So the industry have moved away from explicit consent. So there are other lawful bases that we've been advised by the ICO and Offgem to use. So we can safely share data, but customers can opt out or say they don't want us to share data. It's already happening between DNOs and energy suppliers. So we get PSR data from energy suppliers, but we're doing it in a safe way, GDPR compliant, etc. But I think this is probably a key barrier, or probably say an enabler for more cross-sector collaboration. If we could share even more data, that means that we serve the same customer base, we have visibility of their needs across all their utilities, and we can all support them holistically, as Stephen said.
Thanks, Julia. Guys, we are running out of time. We've got 4 minutes left. Now, Rachel, this is a challenge. You've got a question. You need to answer this in like 1.5 minutes. And the question is from Simon Tricker. Basically, what are the vulnerability? What are you using to measure the success of the vulnerability incentives? How does that work?
I'll be brief on this one. It's something that is currently in development as part of our ED2 price control setting sort of operation that's going on right now, and we'll be sort of setting out more detail on exactly what that looks like as part of our draft determination this summer. But we are sort of working closely with the DNOs and wider stakeholders on the development of the incentive, including what metrics that contains. But I think probably the key things to draw out is around that this metric sort of moves away from a more qualitative metric that we have in ED1 to a more quantitative based metric with sort of more comparability across DNOs. So we're looking to have sort of common metric methodologies where they're reporting things in the same way. You can really see, you know, companies who are driving at ambition and reaching higher targets and those who might be lagging behind, and that incentive should be there in place to set targets and have the mechanisms appropriate to drive ambition where we see that to be fit, or pull up, you know, performance where we see that also to be appropriate through sort of use of penalty and rewards. So hopefully that covers it a little bit more, but on the metrics, draft determinations will be where we set those up.
Thanks, Rachel. And what we'll do is, to those who are on the call, if we've got, we will, this is being recorded, and what we'll try and do is get more detailed response to questions answered and sent out to you. We have got a question on FP, NES and alignment of grant funding, but I'm sorry we haven't got time to go there today, because what I wanted to do just to finish off was to give people an example of the different things, the different activities that are going on to whet the appetite of the innovators watching and listening about what sort of projects are on the go. So I don't know whether we'll go Steve, Giulia and Anna, like literally 30 seconds each on a project that you are proud of in this area that's underway. Yeah, Steve, you first.
Yeah, okay, so the list is extensive, but I'll make it brief. So as I alluded to, the vulnerability mapping, that for us is central to our decision making, to where we fund VCMA projects, how we look at community partners, how we work with innovators and network innovation allowance, how we improve the communities in which we work, and using that mapping tool and using collaboration and using that grassroots engagement is definitely the way to improve society for everyone, you know, not just for customers in vulnerable situations, and ultimately leading to that levelling up as we move into future energy transition. I shall keep it brief.
Thanks, Steve. And just to let those watching know, what's happening in NGN does get shared with the other companies, so people do share, so we learn from each other and fast follow. Giulia.
Yeah, I think since Stephen mentioned vulnerability mapping, which is another one I'm proud of, but I'll probably mention innovation projects that we're doing to ensure no one is left behind in a net zero transition. So on one side, it has been looking at how to ensure people have access to EV charging if they don't have off-street parking, if they are SMEs that are struggling with the transition compared to large fleets, or the disabled drivers, the project focusing on disabled drivers that don't have accessible charging infrastructure on street. Or also considering the transition to low carbon heat, we have been looking at off-gas grid communities, or how to decarbonize it for fuel poor living in social housing. That's been done, for example, in collaboration with the gas network. That's it.
Thank you, Giulia. Last one, Anna. We are now on time. So Anna, I'm really sorry we can't go there. But guys, could I just say to everybody, thank you for listening. If there are areas that you would like the EIC with these panelists and others to do further deep dives on, do let us know, because these webinars are set up to share information with people beyond the industry. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and thank you so much to the panelists for your time and your contribution. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.